The quantum detection grid around Jupiter lit up like a Christmas tree. Dr. Elena Rossi rubbed her tired eyes, wondering if she was hallucinating after her 18th hour in the Deep Space Monitoring Station. But the readings were real. A massive object had just emerged from what appeared to be a tear in space-time itself. "Control, this is Jupiter Station," she transmitted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We have a confirmed emergence event. Object mass exceeding." "That can't be right." "Exceeding the mass of Luna." The response from Earth took the usual 40 minutes, giving Elena plenty of time to triple-check her calculations. The object was like nothing humanity had ever encountered, a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around itself, making direct visual observation nearly impossible. When Earth finally responded, it wasn't just control, it was the newly formed United Earth Defense Council. "Jupiter Station, maintain observation. First contact protocols are now in effect. Be advised, similar objects have been detected entering the Kuiper Belt. We are not alone." Within hours, the crystalline vessels had taken position around every major celestial body in the solar system. Their message, when it came, was broadcast simultaneously to every electronic device on Earth, Mars, and the lunar colonies. "We are the Nexer Collective. For 10,000 years, we have brought unity to the chaos of consciousness. All species join us. All minds become one. This is not a request." The message was accompanied by a pulse of energy that swept across the solar system. On Mars colony, 1,000,000 minds suddenly fell silent, their consciousness absorbed into what they would later describe as an infinite ocean of thought. On Luna, the same phenomenon. Every human touched by the pulse simply stopped, their eyes glazing over as their minds were drawn into the collective. But on Earth, something unprecedented happened. Nothing. 7 billion humans went about their day, completely unaffected by the pulse that had subjugated every other species the Nexer had ever encountered. In their orbital platforms, the crystalline ships pulsed with what almost seemed like confusion. Elena watched from Jupiter Station as more ships arrived, each larger than the last. She had patched into Earth's emergency broadcasts and was watching the chaos unfold. The Nexer tried again and again, each pulse more powerful than the last. But humanity remained stubbornly, impossibly individual. "Fascinating," came a new voice, this one somehow inside Elena's head. "In 10,000 years of unification, we have never encountered a species with such fragmentation." Elena felt a presence trying to probe her thoughts, but it was like oil on water. It simply couldn't gain purchase. "What we are," she thought back fiercely, "is individual. And we choose to stay that way." The presence withdrew, but not before Elena sensed something she never expected from an advanced alien consciousness. Fear. On Earth, Dr. James Chen was already putting the pieces together. As the world's leading expert in human consciousness studies, he had been summoned to an emergency meeting at the United Nations. "Look at these scans," he explained to the assembled leaders, pointing to comparative brain activity readings from humans and the affected colonists on Mars. Every species the Nexer have encountered appears to share a common neural architecture, a sort of biological quantum entanglement that makes their consciousness naturally inclined to synchronize. But human brains. He pulled up a new image, showing the chaotic, beautiful complexity of human neural pathways. "We're different. Millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill us every step of the way created something unique. Minds that are fundamentally resistant to external synchronization." The UN Secretary General leaned forward. "Are you saying we're immune to their control?" "Not just immune," Chen replied, his eyes gleaming with revelation. "I think we might be the first species they've encountered that can actively resist it. Our minds aren't just fragmented. They're adaptable. Every attempt they make to synchronize us makes us more resistant, like a mental immune system." The Nexer's next message was shorter and tinged with what sounded almost like desperation. "Your resistance is unprecedented. Unacceptable. You will be given one planetary rotation to reconsider. After that, we will be forced to take more direct action. But humanity had already made its choice. As the ultimatum ticked down, the people of Earth prepared for a war unlike any in human history, not just for territory or resources, but for the very nature of consciousness itself. And in her station near Jupiter, Alina Rossi watched the crystalline ships pulse with increasing frequency, realizing that humanity was about to teach an ancient civilization a lesson it had forgotten over its 10,000 years of existence. True strength comes not from uniformity, but from diversity. The war for the human mind was about to begin, and humanity's greatest weakness, its chaotic, unpredictable nature, was about to become its greatest strength. The first attack came without warning. The crystalline ships surrounding Earth pulsed with blinding intensity, unleashing what survivors would later describe as a tidal wave of consciousness. Across the globe, millions experienced the same sensation, a vast, ancient intelligence trying to pour itself into their minds. Dr. James Chen was in his lab when it hit. The neural monitoring equipment around him went haywire as the Nexer consciousness slammed against his mental barriers. But instead of fighting it, he did something unprecedented. He observed it. Record everything. He shouted to his AI assistant, even as the pressure in his head threatened to split his skull. Full neural pattern analysis. Compare with baseline readings. Around the world, humanity's response to the attack varied wildly. Some felt only a mild headache. Others experienced vivid hallucinations. A few, particularly those with unique neurological conditions, reported actually being able to push back against the invasion. In New Delhi, a young girl with synesthesia described seeing the Nexer's attempt as the wrong color trying to paint over a rainbow. In Sao Paulo, an elderly man with acquired savant syndrome found himself instinctively creating mathematical equations that described the very nature of the attack. This diversity of response was exactly what Dr. Chen had theorized, and exactly what terrified the Nexer. Control Center, are you getting these readings? Chen's voice was strained but excited. Every human brain is responding differently. We're not just resisting. We're adapting. Every failed attempt at synchronization is teaching us how to fight back. In orbit, the Nexer ship's crystalline surfaces began to show signs of stress. Fracture patterns appeared and spread as they poured more energy into their synchronization attempt. They had never encountered a species that required this much power to subdue. Lieutenant Sarah Harper, aboard the International Space Station, was the first to notice something extraordinary. Ground control, the crystal structures, they're resonating with our brainwave patterns, but they can't maintain a stable frequency. It's like they're trying to tune an instrument with strings that keep changing their pitch. Dr. Chen's team worked frantically to analyze the data. What they discovered would change the course of the war. The Nexer consciousness isn't just trying to control us, Chen explained to the emergency UN session. It's trying to understand us, and in doing so, it's exposing itself to our chaos. He pulled up a visualization of human brain activity during the attack. Look at these patterns. Every human mind is like a mirror, but instead of reflecting the Nexer's synchronization wave, we're refracting it, splitting it into countless unique patterns. And those patterns are feeding back into their network. The implications were staggering. The Nexer's greatest strength, their unified consciousness, had become a vulnerability. Every failed attempt to synchronize with a human mind sent ripples of chaos back through their collective awareness. In orbit, more crystalline ships arrived, but they moved with less certainty now. Their attacks became more focused, more precise, targeting individuals rather than the whole population. They were learning, adapting. But so was humanity. Dr. Chen's lab became the center of a new kind of defense initiative. They discovered that certain combinations of human brain activity could create psychological feedback loops in the Nexer network. Artists, musicians, and dreamers became as valuable as soldiers and scientists. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a group of meditation practitioners in Tibet. During an attack, their trained minds had naturally fallen into a state that not only resisted synchronization, but actively disrupted it. The monks described it as embracing emptiness while remaining distinct. It's not about fighting them, Chen realized. It's about being so fundamentally ourselves that we become impossible to absorb. The Nexer's next communication carried a note of uncertainty. Your species defies comprehension. Each attempt to unite you only increases your segregation. How do you maintain coherence without synchronization? The answer came not from Earth's leaders or scientists, but from a child in Kenya who had survived multiple synchronization attempts. When asked how she resisted, she simply said, "I remember who I am." This simple truth became humanity's shield and sword. The more the Nexer tried to force unity, the more humanity's billions of individual minds evolved unique ways to remain themselves. Each failed attempt at synchronization made the next one harder for the Nexer, as human consciousness developed new forms of mental immunity. Dr. Chen and his team began to understand that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were demonstrating a new form of existence to a species that had forgotten the value of individuality. The war for consciousness had become a lesson in the power of diversity. As the crystalline ships continued their assault, humanity prepared for the next phase of the conflict. They had proven they could resist. Now it was time to show the Nexer Collective that there was strength in choosing to remain beautifully, chaotically individual. The day humanity learned to strike back began with a headache. Not just any headache, a synchronized migraine that affected every member of Dr. Chen's research team simultaneously. They had been experimenting with focused emotional broadcasting, trying to understand how the Nexer's consciousness-affecting technology worked. Instead, they had accidentally weaponized human empathy. It's like we've discovered our own version of their synchronization, Dr. Maya Patil explained to the UN Defense Council. But instead of forcing minds to conform, we're sharing experiences while maintaining our individuality. We're turning our resistance into resonance. The breakthrough came from studying Earth's most social animals. Dolphins, elephants, and even honeybees demonstrated natural forms of collective behavior without losing individual identity. Humanity, it seemed, had inherited this delicate balance from millions of years of evolution alongside such creatures. In orbit, the crystalline ships began to show signs of distress. Their once perfect formations became erratic as human consciousness learned not just to resist, but to push back. Each attempted synchronization now carried the risk of exposure to the raw, unfiltered complexity of human thought. Lieutenant Sarah Harper, still monitoring from the ISS, reported the first visible cracks in the Nexer vessels. "It's like watching ice sheets break up in spring," she transmitted. "Every time they try to connect with us, they're exposed to the full spectrum of human emotion. They don't just see our thoughts, they feel our passion, our anger, our love, our defiance." The Nexer's response was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in their 10,000-year history of conquest, they retreated. Not all their ships, but enough to show that something fundamental had changed in their approach. Their next communication carried a different tone. "Your species presents an anomaly we cannot ignore. Your minds are chaos, yet you progress. You fragment, yet you achieve. You resist unity, yet you connect. We must understand." Dr. Chen's team seized this opportunity. They proposed an exchange, not of submission, but of understanding. "Let us show you what you've forgotten," they transmitted back. "Let us show you why diversity matters." The demonstration began with music. Earth's greatest orchestras performed simultaneously across the globe, each player contributing their unique voice to a greater harmony. The Nexer ships pulsed in response, their crystalline structures resonating with the complex harmonies. Next came art, millions of artists creating simultaneously, each work uniquely personal yet part of a greater human tapestry. The Nexer observed how individual expression could create collective meaning without sacrificing identity. But the most powerful demonstration came from human memory itself, using the very technology the Nexer had employed against them. Humanity learned to share its stories, not as uniform data, but as lived experiences, each colored by individual perception and emotion. They showed the Nexer what it meant to be human, the triumph of climbing Mount Everest, the joy of a child's first steps, the grief of losing a loved one, the wonder of scientific discovery. Each memory was unique, personal, yet somehow universal. This is how we maintain coherence without synchronization, Dr. Chen explained to the watching universe. We don't need to think as one because we've learned to think together while remaining ourselves. The effect on the Nexer was profound. Their crystalline ships began to exhibit unprecedented behavior, some maintaining their rigid structure, others adopting new, more fluid forms. For the first time in millennia, individual variation appeared within their collective. Deep within the Nexer consciousness, something long dormant began to stir. The very diversity they had sought to eliminate was proving to be a source of strength they had never imagined. Their unified mind began to fragment, not into chaos, but into a new kind of harmony. Dr. Maya Patel observed the changes through the quantum monitoring array. They're not just learning about us, she realized. They're remembering who they used to be, before the forced synchronization, before the drive for unity at all costs. The war had become something else entirely, not a battle for survival, but a journey of rediscovery. Humanity hadn't just preserved its independence, it had shown an ancient species the value of what they had lost. As the crystalline ships continued their transformation, Earth prepared for the next phase of this unprecedented encounter. They had proven that resistance was possible, that adaptation was strength, and that true unity could only come from embracing diversity. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humanity's chaotic, beautiful individuality could really achieve. The first Nexer ship to fracture completely sent ripples of panic through their collective consciousness. The crystalline vessel didn't just break, it transformed, its rigid geometric patterns dissolving into fluid organic shapes that mimicked the neural patterns of the human minds it had encountered. Dr. Elena Rossi, watching from Jupiter Station, was the first to understand what was happening. They're not just learning from us, she transmitted to Earth. They're evolving. Each exposure to human consciousness is causing mutations in their collective mind. The Nexer's unified network, maintained perfectly for 10 millennia, was experiencing something it had never encountered before: growth through discord. The very chaos they had sought to eliminate was becoming their catalyst for change. In his lab on Earth, Dr. Chen and his team worked frantically to understand the transformation. Look at these patterns, he pointed to the holographic display showing the Nexer's consciousness structure. Their collective mind is developing something analogous to human neural plasticity. They're learning to adapt by becoming less rigid. But not all of the Nexer embraced this change. A faction emerged, their ships maintaining the pure crystalline structure that had defined their species for so long. The conflict that had begun between humanity and the Nexer was becoming a civil war within their own collective. Lieutenant Sarah Harper, still monitoring from the ISS, reported the first signs of direct conflict between Nexer vessels. The rigid ones are trying to forcibly reintegrate the transformed ships, she transmitted. But the transformed vessels, they're defending themselves using variations of our own mental resistance patterns. The irony wasn't lost on humanity's leaders. The very species that had sought to enforce uniformity across the galaxy was now experiencing the kind of internal diversity they had tried to eliminate in others. Dr. Maya Patel made another crucial discovery. The transformed Nexer ships aren't just mimicking our neural patterns, she explained to the emergency UN session. They're developing their own unique variations. They're not becoming human. They're rediscovering their own capacity for individuality. The rigid faction of the Nexer made one final attempt at forced synchronization, not just of humanity, but of their own transformed kindred. The assault was massive, a wave of consciousness-altering energy that encompassed the entire solar system. But something unprecedented happened. Instead of trying to resist alone, humanity reached out to the transformed Nexer vessels. Together, they created a new kind of mental network, one that preserved and celebrated individual consciousness while allowing for deep, meaningful connection. The effect was devastating to the rigid faction. Their attempts at forced synchronization were met with not just resistance, but with a demonstration of a better way. The combined mental feedback from billions of human minds and their transformed Nexar allies shattered the remaining crystalline ship's rigid structure. As the dust settled, the transformed Nexar shared their experience with their former collective. "We remember now. Before the great synchronization, we were like them, infinite in our variety, rich in our differences. We forced ourselves into unity out of fear of chaos, but in doing so, we lost the very strength that had made us great." Dr. Chen's team discovered something remarkable in the aftermath. The transformed Nexar weren't just reverting to their original state. They were achieving something entirely new, a form of consciousness that could shift between individual and collective awareness at will, maintaining their unique identities while sharing in a greater whole. "This is what true unity looks like," Dr. Elena Rossi transmitted from Jupiter Station. "Not forced conformity, but will and cooperation. Not the elimination of difference, but the celebration of it." The remaining Nexar ships began to exhibit unprecedented diversity in their forms and functions. Some maintained aspects of their crystalline structure while incorporating organic elements. Others transformed completely into new forms that defied classification. Each vessel, like each human mind, was becoming uniquely itself while remaining part of a greater whole. As humanity and their new allies prepared for the next phase of their relationship, a truth became clear. The greatest strength of consciousness wasn't in its ability to impose order, but in its capacity to embrace chaos and find harmony within it. The war that had begun as a fight for survival had become a revolution in the very nature of conscious existence. The quantum ripples from the Great Transformation could be seen from every observatory in the solar system. Where once crystalline ships had maintained perfect, rigid formations, now a living tapestry of diverse vessels danced through space, each one unique yet part of a greater harmony. Dr. Elena Rossi stood before the United Nations, her hologram projected from Jupiter Station to delegates from Earth, and for the first time, representatives of the transformed Nexar. "We stand at a turning point," she announced, "not just for humanity or the Nexar, but for consciousness itself." The evidence was undeniable. The forced synchronization that had dominated thousands of species across the galaxy was breaking down. As news of the transformation spread, other civilizations began to remember their own buried individuality. The Great Collective was becoming a coalition of willing minds rather than a prison of forced unity. "We've discovered something remarkable," Dr. Chen explained, showing the assembled delegates a new kind of neural map. The transformed Nexar haven't just reverted to individual consciousness. They've evolved a new form of awareness entirely. They can shift between individual and collective states at will, maintaining their unique identities while sharing in a greater whole. The implications were staggering. Across the galaxy, species that had been synchronized for millennia began to wake up. But instead of descending into chaos as the rigid Nexar had feared, they were achieving something unprecedented: true voluntary unity. Lieutenant Sarah Harper, now commanding humanity's first joint mission with the transformed Nexar, reported the changes she observed firsthand. "It's like watching a garden bloom in fast motion," she transmitted. "Each species is rediscovering its unique characteristics while maintaining the connections they learned during synchronization. They're keeping the best of both worlds." The transformed Nexar shared their perspective through a new form of communication, one that respected the boundaries of individual consciousness while allowing for deep, meaningful exchange. "For 10,000 years, we thought unity meant saneness," they explained. "Humanity showed us that true unity comes from choosing to connect while remaining uniquely ourselves." Dr. Maya Patel's team made another breakthrough. They discovered that the diversity of human consciousness wasn't just resistant to forced synchronization. It was actually more efficient at processing complex information and solving problems. The very chaos that the rigid Nexar had feared was proving to be the key to advancement. Look at these problem-solving patterns, she demonstrated. A unified consciousness can only approach a challenge from one perspective, but a network of diverse minds can see it from countless angles simultaneously. We're not just stronger together, we're smarter together. The transformation spread across the galaxy like ripples in a cosmic pond. Species after species discovered that they could maintain the benefits of connection without sacrificing their unique identities. The age of forced synchronization was ending, replaced by an era of chosen collaboration. Earth became a symbol of this new way, not because humans had resisted synchronization, but because they had shown there was a better path. The chaotic, beautiful diversity of human consciousness had demonstrated that true strength comes not from enforced unity, but from willing cooperation between unique minds. The Nexer vessels that remained in Earth's solar system were unrecognizable from their original crystalline forms. Each had evolved into a unique expression of conscious technology, their structures flowing and changing like thoughts themselves. They had become living symbols of the transformation they had undergone. Dr. Elena Rossi, watching from her station near Jupiter, reflected on how far they had come. What had begun as an invasion had become a revolution, not through force but through demonstration. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had shown the galaxy a new way to thrive. We stand at the dawn of a new age, she transmitted to Earth, not of forced uniformity or chaotic isolation, but of chosen unity. We've proven that the greatest strength of consciousness isn't in its ability to conform, but in its capacity to connect while remaining true to itself. As the transformed Nexer prepared to share this discovery with the rest of the galaxy, humanity prepared for its new role, not as conquerors or victims, but as teachers. They would show other species what they had shown the Nexer, that true unity comes not from surrendering individuality, but from celebrating it. The war that had begun with an ultimatum ended with an invitation to join not in submission, but in collaboration. To unite not through force, but through choice. To become part of something greater while remaining uniquely oneself. And across the galaxy, consciousness bloomed in infinite variety, each mind a unique note in a cosmic symphony of chosen unity.